Welcome back for my November reading wrap-up and reading journal update. A little late, life has been a little hectic, but here are 5 new book journal spreads about the books I read last month. Let's start with The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana, which was such a pleasant surprise. I came for the cozy fantasy and stayed for the wholesome romance and found family trope. Micah Moon, a young witch in England, has grown up knowing she has to hide her magic from the world, stay away from other witches to avoid them being discovered, and the only way she expresses her witchiness to the world is through social media, where she makes pretend witchy videos, which she thinks no one is going to take seriously anyways. And when someone does reach out to her after seeing her videos asking for help, Micah gingerly agrees to help out 3 young witches to gain control of their powers, to prevent their exposure and the risk of them being taken away from their caregivers. But everyone is keeping secrets, so nothing really goes as planned. This book is a cute romance with themes of found family, emotional healing, and of course magic. But don't expect a full-blown magical system. It's more the general concept of magic and witches as we know it from fairy tales and like early Harry Potter maybe. Also, this book gets bonus points for the romantic interest being a broody hot librarian and the romance plotline just being incredibly wholesome. I think you will enjoy this book if you liked The House in the Cerulean Sea and A Far Wilder Magic, which give off similar vibes to me. It's a cozy fantasy meets healing romance, and also if you like the grumpy sunshine romance trope, you will probably like this one as well. I read this book as part of my Reading Popular and Hyped Books TBR, and I think it's the one that positively surprised me the most. It's definitely a new comfort book to me. I read it on my Kindle, but I will be looking out for a physical copy so I can reread it in the future. Next, I read The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera. It's a novel of love and politics in communist Czechoslovakia in the late 1960s and 80s. A young woman falls instantly in love with a guy who is torn between his love for her and his womanizing tendencies. The book is full of clever observations, the author's reflections on them, and then surprisingly simple but philosophical explanations for them. It tackles some pretty big philosophical topics and questions, but the author really explains them in a pretty straightforward way. It felt to me that the novel is not the main purpose of the book, but the means to explain and show an example of the author's thoughts and reasonings. So don't expect a smooth plot or characters you will get attached to, but I don't think that was the intent anyways. It often does this thing where it disproves its own points to show that life is really nuanced and complex and that things depend on perspective, that things are relative. And in terms of my enjoyment of this book, I would have to give it mixed reviews, though. There were parts that I loved and thought were brilliant, and then there were parts that I thought were just bizarre, a bit pretentious, a little gross sometimes, and sometimes just not that interesting. So overall, I'm glad I read this. I can understand why this is considered a classic. It's not an all-time favorite for me, but it was mostly enjoyable. I also read Time is a Mother, which is a poetry collection by Ocean Vuong. It is another of his works that is heart-wrenching with themes of grief, sexuality, war, depression. It's a very intimate collection. At times, I definitely felt like I was reading something I wasn't supposed to read. It's very raw and bold in terms of content, very experimental and varied in terms of format as well. It's really a full journey. I always have a very difficult time reviewing poetry. I don't read it often, and I never feel like I have anything interesting or even just coherent to say. But I will say this, if you enjoyed Ocean Vuong's On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, and especially if you like the author's other poetry collection, Night Sky with Exit Wounds, you will probably enjoy this one as well. It has a similar feeling of melancholy to it. Some of the themes overlap. Some of it is also written more in prose, in a prose-like style. It is not an easy to read poetry collection, both in terms of topics, but also language and form. I found it harder to read than the other collection of poetry, and I guess therefore I liked it a little less. I'm not saying it's less good, but it's definitely less accessible, in my opinion. Next, I read The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. I was a little slow to start enjoying this book, but the more I read, the more I was hooked. The Vanishing Half is a story of twin sisters. They grew up together in a small black community in southern US. They run away together at age 16 and end up in completely separate lives in every way. Decades later, one sister lives back home with her daughter, having moved back in with her mom. The other one lives with her white husband, herself also identifying publicly as white, and her husband not knowing anything about her background, her family, or anything or anyone from her past. Their daughters end up crossing paths, and their lives inevitably become entangled again. The story starts slow, which is why it took me a minute to get into it, but I think that just resulted in very nuanced, complex characters that you really learn to understand quite deeply. A key theme in this book is identity and race. It's the first time I've read a book that talks about the racist nuances of light-skinned and dark-skinned people of color, as well as delves a lot into the concept of being white passing and the complexities that come with that, which I thought was really interesting. It has also really well thought out themes on gender identity, motherhood, and family in general. I think the story as a whole was a really good read, really interesting how all these themes came together quite naturally and into a coherent, interesting plotline. I thought the writing was quite simple, but still quite quotable at times. It is quite a tough read at times as well, but overall it has a very hopeful message of the importance of empathy, and so overall I would definitely recommend this book. Lastly, I also read The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. Looking back at reading it, I am torn. I can recognize its brilliancy, but I'm not sure I am as obsessed with it as I thought I would be. It's definitely all the things I've heard about it before. It's beautifully written, ahead of its time in many ways, and you will get to that famous fig passage and agree that it is indeed so brilliant. The book is very bleak, melancholic, and disturbing at times, and therefore terrifying because it is considered somewhat autobiographical. For those who are not familiar, the story is set in the 50s and follows Esther, who moves to New York City for an internship at a fashion magazine. Esther is smart but ends up in several precarious situations and struggles with ever-worsening mental health. It is said that the book is comprised of random occurrences that happened in the author's life and then put together in a book, so quite gutting. I will probably read this again. I'm not sure if I was in the right headspace to read this book. It might just not be what I wanted to read right now, and maybe that's why I didn't enjoy it as much. And the writing is gorgeous, and for that alone, I want to read it again sometime. and maybe I'll read some of the author's other work or poetry. Some content warnings, though, that due to the time that this was written in, there are quite some passages that are racist and homophobic. So those are the 5 books that I read. I hope you enjoyed the wrap-up and reading journal spreads. If you did, please like and subscribe. That would really help me out. I will hopefully see you soon for my reading journal setup for 2024. Thank you so much for watching and have a nice day.